The build-up to House of the Dragon Season 3 has been a bit odd. I've never seen a fan base so dejected at the prospect of a new season of the show they follow, but I can understand why. Season 2 was disappointing for a myriad of reasons that have been talked about to death by this point, and for the most part, I tend to agree with most of the criticism. For me, George R. R. Martin's deleted Toxic Butterflies blog post changed the way I view House of the Dragon and my relationship with it. Coming into Season 3, I did try and be positive. The trailers did look good. But sadly, despite Season 3 Episode 1 doing lots of things really well, the bad was indeed unforgivably bad. When George R. R. Martin said this isn't his story anymore, I now understand what he means. For me, this feels a lot like Game of Thrones Season 6. Enjoyable and thrilling telly, but as a story, as an adaptation of a book, and from a screenwriting point of view, it's generally very poor. It's a 50-50 kind of thing. For every good thing is standing in the shadow of something negative. I really like the concept behind the House of the Dragon title sequences and how they've changed over the seasons, but I think this might be the first time a remixed version of the theme tune has been used. I like it. The drums kind of remind me of the original title sequence music I once used on this channel, but my main question now is why now? In Season 3? Why not do this in Season 1, or when the whole sequence got reworked for Season 2? But hey, I'm not going to discourage a positive thing. The first episode of this season has a unique problem. It was meant to be the final episode of Season 2 before it was reduced to 8 episodes. And when you know that context, the approach the writers took with the pacing of Season 2 makes a lot more sense. This was supposed to be the dramatic climax of the season. But at the same time, the Battle of the Gullet does work just as well as a season opener. Rhaena taking the role of Nettles from the book has been one of the most controversial changes Ryan Condal and Sara Hess have made from the book. Given how much of a beloved character Nettles is, and what makes her so special compared to the other characters of the Dance of the Dragons, cutting her and giving her role to Rhaena was always going to upset a large amount of the fanbase. As a fan, I hate it. But when I take a step back and try to look at it objectively, I can see why Condal and Hess saw the appeal in doing this, and it does work well within the context of the show and the character of Rhaena that they've been building up. Now, I think if Rhaena had just taken Nettles' place in the story, while annoyed a lot of fans could have looked past it. But I think what has compounded the issue is what Condal and Hess decided to do with Rhaena and Sheepstealer after they have bonded. I'm talking about her role in the Gullet, which we will circle back to later on. Now, I think I'm really thoroughly going to enjoy Aegon and Larys Strong this season. I was wondering how they were going to tackle Aegon's arc, given that in Fire and Blood he just vanishes from the story until the very end, with a vague explanation of what he's been up to after the fact. But it's very clear they were never going to be able to do this with the TV show, and they're going to spend some time this season with Aegon building himself back up as a person. The whole asking Aegon to kneel and pledge loyalty to Rhaenyra was hilarious, and Larys is always one step ahead, knowing Aegon's true identity in this situation is the only thing that could save their heads for the time being. In the moment, however, Aegon has no clue what Larys' plan actually is. By the looks of it, they're being sent to Duskendale by the guards to be taken to Dragonstone via ship, which I guess is how they're going to unify with the book plot. I am looking forward to seeing what Aegon and Larys get up to the rest of the season. I also enjoyed how the Black Council collectively called out Alicent and Rhaenyra's plans as crazy, because anyone with half a brain would be mad to trust either Rhaenyra or Alicent at this point. If the show was actually bothered to evolve Alicent and Rhaenyra's relationship, then none of this would actually be happening. The death of Lucerys should have been a point of no return. Blood and Cheese certainly should have been a point of no return. Rook's Rest and so on. Is why the whole concept of Alicent going to Dragonstone last season fundamentally made absolutely no sense. Hell, even Rhaenyra going to King's Landing makes no sense. What makes this frustrating is even if we ignore the adaptation part of this, from a simple storytelling, screenwriting point of view, none of this makes any sense. And the character motivations and relationships are still seemingly stuck back in season 1 and haven't changed. Alicent's return to King's Landing highlights how stupid this plan was from the get-go. There was just too many moving parts for there to be a clean transition of power like she was planning. Aemond is just too much of a wild card to predict what he's going to do and when. So the death of Lucerys and Rook's Rest show this. So Alicent gets back to find Aegon gone, Aemond now calling himself king, and her plan in ruins. For me, I actually believe the Alicent-Aemond kiss is the moment the show jumped the shark. Is it consistent with the mummy issues kind of character they built for Aemond? Yes. Am I surprised Aemond has this weird relationship with Alicent? No. Has Alicent used this to try and manipulate and control him in this situation? Yes. So while I get where they're going with it, the actual kiss was awkward and uncomfortable, as it was, which I admit is clearly the writer's intent, but for me was just a step too far. After the Alyssa Daemon stuff last season at Harrenhal, I don't get what Condal and Hess are trying to do here, except maybe draw some parallels between Aemond and Daemon psychologically. I really hope this is the end of this now, but I'm really worried with how the show might go about Aemond and Alice Rivers this season, and I hope they don't go down the mummy issues path with it, with her being a surrogate for Alicent. God forbid what kind of visions Aemond's going to have at Harrenhal at this point. I'm not 100% sure what battle Daemon is supposed to be fighting in the Riverlands here. I think from the context it's some version of the Red Fork or Acorn Hall. It's hard to know as Daemon wasn't really actively involved in the battles in the book at this point in time. I do find it bizarre that Daemon is fighting rather than on Dragonback, given how powerful a dragon is, and that being on a battlefield inherently dangerous. We get our first look at the Winter Wolves and Roddy the Ruin, whom has been cast perfectly from the very little we've seen of him. They seem to have killed the fleeing Lannister army, including Lord Jason, as they're running towards the God's Eye. Now, the first mention of the God's Eye made me think about the Fishfeed, given the battle is the next obvious step in the Riverlands. But I have this really awful feeling that it's either been cut or it's going to be a burning meal situation like from season 2, but we just see the aftermath of the Fishfeed, which would be a crying shame as is one of the most interesting battles of the dance. The reason I fear it may have been cut or happens off screen is the dialogue kind of implies that the Winter Wolves just killed the fleeing elements of the Lannister army. I really hope I am wrong, but given what we know happens roughly next week, I can't see a way the Fishfeed exists in the way that we know it. I really do not like what I'm seeing with Criston Cole this season so far. I think his arc of being worn down and his morals slowly decaying makes sense with how the show has treated his character. I just fundamentally don't like the show's interpretation of his character. I was one of the very few who really liked how they handled Criston in season 1 and his complex relationship with both Alicent and Rhaena. I liked how they built upon his book character. He was different from the book, but in a way that makes sense in the context of a long-form TV show. But frankly, as of season 2, they've turned him into a pathetic and sad character. I guess as a way to try and get across the impact and horror of war can have on a man. I fear for what Condal and Hess are going to try and do with the Butcher's Ball, and I sincerely hope there is some kind of redemption for Cole there, and it's not just turned into a humiliation ritual to beat the character with. Now, I will get into this later. I have very strong feelings about the Dragonseeds not being part of the Gullet. But saying that, I did enjoy this scene with them on the banks of the God's Eye. I think it's vital, given the events to come later in the season, they show the setup and dynamic between the seeds. And well, we as a viewer get to know them on a deeper level. I can already start to see them laying the groundworks for some of the plot twists to come in the back half of the season. It also helps set up some of the stuff with Adam being so close to the Isle of Faces. Seeing Alice Rivers was a surprise. I do think she's going to play a small role in Adam's story, but even more of a shock was the cameo of the Green Man. We saw one at the end of season 2 with Daemon and his weirwood vision. The cameo of a Green Man had me wondering what the show's going to do with them, and it's actually keeping me watching at this point. They've been this huge mystery for the better part of 30 years. Book lore on them is thin, but it's clear they have some kind of role to play in the history of Westeros, and might play some sort of role in the books should the Winds of Winter actually see the light of day. I think it's going to be via the Green Men. They're going to try and link House of the Dragon more firmly into the canon of the main show, in a more tangible way than just Aegon's dream or his dagger. I really like what they're doing with Corlys and Alyn, and I'm happy they're spending some time together this episode, building their relationship, as the impact of the ship combat part of the battle with the Gullet really hinges on the audience caring about Corlys and Adam. I'm not a huge fan of what they did with the Triarchy fleet and Lohar in general. It was all just fine. The Triarchy and Lohar did the job needed to narrative-wise. Yes, they were given a lot of screen time last season, and in this episode as well. But like I said, for the ship-to-ship combat sequence to work at the end of the episode, the viewers have to care about Alyn and Corlys, but also dislike the Triarchy and Lohar. If that was the goal, then I think they actually hit the mark with that. I really liked the little bit that we saw of Aemond Hightower this episode. I think he's going to be a very interesting and slightly grey character. And I like the fact they seem to be pulling from the faith aspect of House Hightower with him, given how interlinked the two are. I'm also thrilled to see Bold John Roxton, a character I feared was going to be left on the cutting room table. His dynamic with Aemond looks fun. We've yet to see any sign of Unwin Peak, which is concerning, but given what other big name characters have been cut, sadly, unless we see him soon, I think he'll be joining Nettles and Maelor in House of the Dragon Purgatory. We also have our first look at Tessarion, the Blue Queen. It's nice to see a dragon with a bit more vibrance than we're used to in the show. I think we also get a glimpse of who we suspect is Daeron Targaryen. The brown hair has caught some people off guard, and there is this fan theory from years ago that Daeron was going to look more like Alicent, hence why she sent him away from court, as Alicent's argument about Rhaenyra's children kind of falls more flat with Daeron present. I never brought into that theory personally. I suspect we might actually have a young Griff situation, and Daeron has dyed his hair to protect his identity. Sadly, however, it looks like no Battle of the Honeywine, which begs the question as to if Tumbleton might be the first time we really see Daeron in action, which would kind of be a little bit odd if I'm honest. I think a lot of the main issues with the writing with this episode, one I hope is a one-off with this episode in particular, is that it's just devoid of all logic. And we see this perfectly well with the scenes where Jace locks Rhaenyra in her room to prevent her from going to the Gullet. Now in theory, I don't hate this. I like the idea of Jace trying to protect his mother, and the fact he's been prevented thus far from taking real action in the war, being real motivation. All of that tracks. It just doesn't make sense that this all hinges on Sir Laurent Marbrand, with the Kingsguard allowing this to happen, taking orders directly from Jace rather than from his queen. And the logic the show runs with is Jace is doing this to protect the life of Rhaenyra, with him using this reason to convince Sir Laurent that locking Rhaenyra in her room does not contradict his vows as a knight of the Kingsguard. The issue is, at the same time, the Kingsguard are sworn to obey the Queen above all else. So even if we followed Jace's order and kept her locked in her room, the moment Rhaenyra orders the door unlocked, Sir Laurent should do so. So the logic used just falls apart. This is why I compare House of the Dragon a lot to Season 6 of Game of Thrones. While the writing has some huge functional issues, there's just enough things well enough and good enough to distract from the gaping issues. I really think this is a case of a wonderful cast elevating questionable writing. I have mixed feelings about the Battle of the Gullet itself. It's fundamentally different from the book, but it was always going to be. If I pop off my book reader hat for a sec and pop back on my screenwriting hat, in terms of creating an interesting piece of storytelling that's visually compelling and has real stakes, I think they probably did a good job. You can't just do a one-for-one copy of the book because it's frankly too straightforward. The only real plot twist other than Jace's death is the surprise sack of Driftmark. In the book, the Velaryon fleet outnumbers the Triarchy, and they have 5 Dragon Riders, so I get why the show tried to balance out the ship numbers and reduce the number of Dragon Riders down to 2, other of course than cost-cutting measures. Adding Baela into the Gullet also makes a lot of sense, especially given her relationship with Jace, and how they later on use Rhaena, so I don't really have a problem with that. I like how they established early that there's a lot of risk in battle even if you're a dragon rider. A stray arrow here or there, a well-placed scorpion bolt, and you're in trouble. The Triarchy knows how to fight dragons, so showing Jace in real peril early on raises the stakes. Do I miss Ulf, Hugh and Adam and Nettles being there? Yes. Is this going to make the character development make less sense? Kind of. However, I think they will still take them down their book path but via a different means altogether. They've already started to seed that with Ulf, and they could change things for Hugh, with his family being a catalyst. As a naval battle, I also really loved it. A lot of shows stay away from them because of just how hard they are and expensive they are to film. So it's rare we really see a huge one with this kind of scale. Now, my fiance hated it, but I loved the sequence of the sea snake leading Lohar through the shallows of the Dragonstone Pass. We hear all the time how great of a sailor Corlys Velaryon is supposed to be, and his famed 9 voyages. But until now, we've never really actually got to see that side of him. I know they were planning a live-action Sea Snake spin-off covering his 9 voyages, which is apparently now not happening from what I understand. But this sequence alone changed my view on it. I used to think it was a dumb idea, but I would love to see it now. For what it's worth, I don't think Tywin Lannister is dead. I'm sure they're going to pull a Season 7 Jaime Lannister and him wind up alive on the shoreline. The actual ship-to-ship combat between the Sea Snake and Lohar I enjoyed more than the full-on Battle of the Gullet itself. Brutal, and not the kind of combat we've seen thus far on any of the TV shows, with the Blackwater being the closest, but that being held back for budget reasons and frankly the very nature of the battle itself. The fight between Corlys and Lohar was very cool, thanks to some very different styles of combat. I loved Corlys using an Arak he must have gotten from Essos. I've seen some fans say it's Velaryon still, which I guess would make sense. Again, I doubt Corlys is dead. I believe Alyn's going to save him, which would instigate events to come next week. Sheepstealer crashing the party. I don't love it. In context, yeah, it makes sense. With the cutting of Aegon and Viserys being the motivation for Jace's reckless actions during the Gullet, he needed something else to justify him making such foolish and reckless mistakes, especially after he was almost killed the exact same way at the start of the battle. My main issue with Rhaena losing control of Sheepstealer is it fundamentally goes against everything we know about the bond between a rider and a dragon from a book view. What I will say, however, is I guess it does mirror Aemond losing control of Vhagar at Storm's End that results in Luke's death. So maybe dragon bonds just work differently in show canon. I guess Rhaena being responsible for Jace's death is why she ends up being ostracized by Rhaenyra later in the story, which is exactly what happens with Nettles. I do wonder how they will end Rhaena's story, because you cannot give her Nettles' ending. Building on that, what the hell are they even going to do with Sheepstealer come story's end? Jace's death was well done. He gets hit once and there's this distant acceptance of what's about to happen. The issue is they did such a poor job with Jace's character by speedrunning his development and arc in Season 2, I found it hard to actually really connect with him and care. At first, I was very upset that Aegon and Viserys were removed from their role in the build-up to the Gullet. It has huge implications not just on the Battle of the Gullet, but for the long-term future of the story. It kind of breaks if their arc is cut. Now, I'm not Ryan Condal's biggest fan, but some comments he made in a post-episode interview about why they removed Aegon and Viserys and the gay abandoned from the Gullet do kind of make sense from a practical filmmaking perspective. Filming the gay abandoned sequence with such young children, given the scale of the action involved and the dragon riding aspect, would have been near on unworkable with the age of the children involved. I accept this logic. When I sit down and think about it, yeah, in this case Condal might actually have a point. We also need to factor in that Aegon and Viserys are actually much younger in the show canon than in the books, and Stormcloud is also far too young to ride. So yeah, I think the writing was on the wall ages ago if we look back. However, just because they didn't do the book version of this doesn't mean they won't be doing some version of Aegon and Viserys' story, just approached from a different way. In my mind, they absolutely have to, or key elements of the story just fall apart. So before I go all doom and gloom with this, let's just see where it goes. I think the biggest loss from this change was the loss of the motivation for Jace at the Gullet, hence why Sheepstealer going rogue was sadly needed to fill that void. The reviews I've seen online from mainstream media are slightly puzzling. They are mostly saying 9 or 10 out of 10, but then again, they need to be sucking up to HBO for all the privileged access they get to actors and premieres and frankly early access to episodes. There is no way IGN is going to give the show anything less than a 7. There were a few mainstream sites that broke rank and were critical. Fans seem very split as well. There are some who seem to be defending everything the show does, like they're protecting their firstborn child. There are others who shit on everything the show does, even when it does get some things right. Now, I get no special access to the episodes, and I will always be honest about how I feel about House of the Dragon and any of the A Song of Ice and Fire TV shows, but I'm always trying to look at it from a more balanced point of view from my experience as a fan, but also my professional experience from screenwriting and working in film. Sometimes I get accused ironically for being a hater of the show, or dick riding HBO, sometimes even in the same video. The truth is, I love A Song of Ice and Fire, even at its worst. The shows, alongside the books, are at the heart of this channel. It was House of the Dragon Season 1 that catapulted the growth of this channel to where we are today. I will forever be grateful for that. I want the show to be good, and to be doing well, because that's the way the fandom evolves and grows. So if I say something positive, it's not dick riding. If I say something negative, I'm not shitting on the show. There is this middle ground with nuance, and it's okay for some shows just to be okay. Like I've said, House of the Dragon is very Game of Thrones Season 6 coded. Some good, some bad. Still entertaining TV that's very well produced, with a lot of care and love. Very 50-50, and that's okay. So as I did with Season 2, I really think a fair score for this episode is a 7 out of 10. The episode did many things well. The Gullet was fun to watch, but there was just too many choices made devoid of any logic or reason, characters simply acting, well, dumb, that does pull down what could have been a brilliant TV show to a decent average. Better than most shows, but certainly not a 10 out of 10.